Welcome to an RPG in a Box video tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a quick look at how to import BlockBench models into RPG in a Box using the native importing ability that was introduced in the recent BlockBench update. Now, this is going to be covering the native support that RPG in a Box offers. However, there is a third-party converter out there if you encounter any issues importing via the native importer, or if you want to use any advanced features that third-party converter offers. But I just wanted to cover in this video just how to just naturally import BlockBench models into RPG in a Box and some things you need to be mindful of with via limitations, but also things to just be mindful of if you're going to use the native importer. What I will say as well is that the native importer is very bare bones and very sort of in its infancy. It's looking for improvements. So while the converter is obviously a super duper, solution, 9 times out of 10, any importing issues you have with the native importer will just work with the converter. What I will say is if I can encourage people to still try and use the native importer and any issues that crop up naturally to report them so that the importer can just get better over time. Because obviously the idea is for RPG in a Box to just natively support BlockBench without the need of any third-party software. So while you're absolutely free to use the converter, and if you have any issues, please do use it. This video should at least show you how to start using BlockBench and RPG in a Box together. And if you encounter any issues, do please report those issues to Justin so that he can improve the already pretty stable importing ability that we have now. So it's very bare bones at the moment, as you'll see if we take a look first of all at the documentation for importing from BlockBench. It talks at the very bottom about some limitations that this current version has, and we'll be covering a couple of these in this video, such as this one, for example, the rotations greater than 180 degrees. There's also issues with certain bone setups. Collision hitboxes currently don't animate, so it will always use the first frame for BlockBench models. But these are things that are planned to be improved over time. But these are just, because it's a bare bones implementation at the moment, just to get the importing working. These are just things to bear in mind. What I will say is that the update definitely has improved the ability for RPG in a Box to just natively import BlockBench models. There are still the occasional animation issues that will be ironed out, but for the most part, static models should just import flawlessly now. So I remember back when I was using the very first version of BlockBench support, I couldn't even import a simple box. That was how sort of unreliable it was. And that's in a way why the converter was created in the first place, because the natural ability for RPG in a Box to import BlockBench models was almost non-existent, even though it said it did. Now, since the BlockBench update, it definitely seems to be a lot more reliable, and definitely I can at least say it does support BlockBench now. That's not to say it's not primitive, but it will improve over time. Anyway, so the other thing I'm going to say as we switch over to BlockBench is this isn't going to be a modeling tutorial. So if you don't know how to model in BlockBench, this isn't going to cover that because that's a topic in and of itself. There are plenty of tutorials out there on YouTube about how to use this piece of software. This is purely about once you've made a model, how do you get it out of BlockBench and into RPG in a Box, okay? And we're going to cover a couple of examples and talk about some things you need to be mindful of when it comes to importing from BlockBench into the current version of the native importer, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new generic model. Now, when you make a model for RPG in a Box, you want it to be a generic model. So none of these Minecraft, Java block options. You want to choose generic model, okay? Call it whatever you want. As I say, this is not a tutorial. I'm just going to quickly throw something together that we can import. So I'm just going to call this cube box or something like that. Click confirm. So what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly add a cuboid, and I'll just click confirm. Okay, so we've got a simple cube, and I might just make it square. The dimensions don't matter, but in this case I just want to make it a square object. In fact, I might make it 8 by 8 by 8. Okay, it's a little cube that we can import into RPG in a box. So we'll start very simple. And the idea with this is going to be a static object. So we're not going to animate it just yet. We won't worry about animation. We're just talking about how do you get a model from BlockBench into RPG in a box. So what we're going to do is very quickly texture this. I'm just going to quickly, in fact, I'll do it this way. I'll just do it via paint. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint one of the faces deliberately a different color. But let's just, so we're going to make this predominantly red. So I'll probably cut this out. I'm just going to paint the box. When I'm done, we'll come back. Okay, so I've completely covered this cube in red. But what I'm also going to do is just paint one of the faces blue, just so that this can simulate the front of the box. And this will be important for when we import it into RPG in a box. Okay, so there's our cube. Very simple, just a simple cube model. This is what I was talking about earlier, where I couldn't even import this into RPG in a box with the first iteration of BlockBench support. So it's definitely come a long way when you can actually finally import things. Anyway, so here we are. We've got our model. So we're going to click File, Save Model, and it will want to save the texture. So you're going to obviously pick somewhere where you're going to save it. So I might just create a separate folder for this tutorial. So I'll just call this tutorial model. And we've got our red texture. So it will save your textures first, and then it will ask you where do you want to put the BlockBench model, the BB model. So we'll put that in the same place, which is tutorial model, cubebox.bb model, click save, and there we go. So there's our rendered or exported model. So now what we can do is we can go back to RPG in a box, and we can go to the model maker, and we can click new. So the first thing you want to do is decide what type of asset is this BlockBench model going to be. Is it a tile? Is it an object? Or is it a character? In my case, it's going to be an object. We're just going to have a simple cube object that's going to sit in our map. So the next thing you want to pick is mesh-based, because we don't want to make a voxel model because that's the in-house voxel editor, which we're not using that. We want to import a mesh-based model from, in this case, BlockBench. Then we're going to choose the name, the RPG in a box asset name for this model. So let's just call this jukebox. We may as well give it the same name. And then you can set the grid size, although the BlockBench model can exceed that, so it doesn't really matter. And at the end of the day, the grid size will obviously conform to RPG in a box limitations, but a BlockBench model can obviously comfortably go outside those. The collision might be an issue, but the model can definitely exceed these dimensions. So you don't really have to worry too much about the grid size. In my case, though, that's fine. I'm going to leave it as it is and click OK. What you'll then get is this empty model, because obviously we've created a mesh-based model, but we haven't told the editor yet what the model is. So then what you want to do is, once you're in this position, you're going to click this button here on the toolbar, Import from External Format. So if you click that, that will bring up this window, this dialog here, where you're going to choose a source file. So you're going to click Browse, and we're going to find that BB model that we rendered out from BlockBench. So in my case, I go to RPG in a Box Games, Tutorial Model, and in this case, cubebox.bb model. Click Open. And that will return you to this dialog. And there'll be an option here which we'll leave unticked for now, but I will talk about this in a moment. We'll come back to it. But for now, I'm just going to click OK. And there's our model inside RPG in a Box. So if we rotate, we can see our model. Now, remember how I colored one of the faces blue, and there was a reason for that. Let me just return us to the front. You'll notice that what will tend to happen 9 times out of 10 with RPG in a Box, there might be a way to avoid this. It might just be how you set the model up in BlockBench. But one quick easy fix is when you bring in your model, if it's facing the wrong way, in this case it is, all you have to do is just click the rotate buttons until the face that you've designated as the front is facing you when this says front. Now this model is correct, and we can click save. And if we wanted to, we could go to our map, go to our models, our objects, find cube box, and place it into our map. And that's it. That's as complicated as it is to import a static BlockBench model into RPG in a Box. Now let's go back for a minute and quickly talk about this option that we ignored to begin with, which is the double-sided faces. What's that all about? Well, if we go to BlockBench again and I select this blue face and I delete it and I resave the model, and we go back to RPG in a Box and we re-import it, but this time I'll leave this unticked. Okay? If we rotate the cube, you'll notice that once we get to the face that we deleted, not only do we not see the face because it's gone, we deleted it, but we also can't see we can't see the cube anymore. By angle it in such a way, the cube disappears. And that's because the other side of these faces, the external faces, we told RPG in a Box not to use the internal faces. That's what the double-sided faces option is all about. So now we can't see inside the cube because the internal face, these faces here, these external ones, they're no longer double-sided. That's what that option is for. So anytime you can see into your model and look at the other side of faces, you're going to want to enable that option. So if I re-import it, but I tick this, now if I turn the camera around, now I can see inside the cube and I can see the inside of those faces. So I can see the other side of this face here. So if you ever want to make something hollow and be able to see inside it, that's why you would tick that option. The reason I didn't tick it the first time is because as this was a complete box, there would be no way to see inside it anyway. So there's no point ticking this because that would just add extra processing to something that's not necessary. So if there's no way for you to be able to see the other side of faces, you wouldn't tick that. But if you can, then you should. And the documentation in RPG in a Box, I believe, talks about the fact that this is model wide. Let me find it for a moment in the documentation because it's quite important to talk about double-sided faces. So if your BlockBench model has any flat 2D elements, essentially these are flat if you think about it. These are now flat planes, as it were. Even though this is a 3D model, it's made up of, in this case, 5 flat sides, right? So we're looking at essentially a flat object here. This side, this surface, is a flat face. So going back to the documentation, if your BlockBench model has any flat 2D elements where you can see both sides, you want to check that option before importing the model. This will force all faces to be double-sided, okay? So just be mindful of that it's model-wide. So if there's any part of your model that you don't want to be able to see the other side of, that's currently not possible because it's going to apply it across the entire model. So you just need to be mindful of that. So that's the bare bones part of importing a BlockBench model, static, and what the double-sided faces option is for. So now let's get a little bit more advanced and talk about animating, because that's where a lot of people run into problems with the current importer and how to get models to import but also animate properly when they're using animations. So let's go back to RPG in a Box. Sorry, not RPG in a Box. Let's go back to BlockBench. And I'm not going to go too, I'm not going to go too complicated here. I'm just going to create a couple of meshes that I can animate. So we'll just make something very simple. Oops. As I say, the idea of this is not to be a modeling tutorial, so I'm not going to make anything amazing. It's just to show you the importing side of things. So, what we're going to do first of all is we're going to put these into groups or bones, whatever you want to call them. So I'll just make 3 groups. Oops, didn't want to nest them. Do it this way. Yep. Or just call them unimaginative names like this for now. Oops. I'm going to pop each of these inside. So move to box 1, move to box 2, move to box 3. And then what you ideally want to then do is create a parent group. So we'll just call this main for now. And then you want to select all of these. So shift select each one and put all of these inside that main group. Okay, so you've got your main group, and then inside that you've got your subfolders or subbones or whatever, and then inside those are your individual meshes. Okay, so to animate, again, this is not a tutorial. I assume you know how to animate in BlockBench. I'm going to go to the Animate tab. Now, one thing you do need to know, and that's why I mention it here if you don't know this already, RPG in a Box has predefined animation names such as idle, walk, default if it's a object, attack, death, that kind of thing. So if you want your BlockBench models to just automatically animate, like for example, if you're making a player character or an NPC and you want them to be able to walk when they walk, player walk animation when they walk, you're going to want to name those animations the same names in BlockBench as you would name them in RPG in a Box. So in this case, if we just make this an object that animates, we're going to want to make an animation by clicking Add Animation in BlockBench, and we're going to want to call it Default, or you would call this Idle if it was a character, and you're going to want to most likely loop it, okay? Then click Confirm, okay? Again, I'm assuming you know how to use BlockBench, so I'm not going to go into great detail on what I'm doing here. I'm just going to quickly animate these boxes to do something, and then we'll import it. So box 1's not going to animate, it's just the main body. So we'll make box 2 do something. So we'll edit its rotation, and we'll make it a 3-second animation. So we'll add one more keyframe at the end, and we'll just make it do 90 degrees maybe. Oops, I'm rotating the wrong one. Box 2 is this one. So delete those. Box 2, add a point there, add a point there. And then, as I say, that one can be 90 degrees. Okay, wrong way. Just getting the right axis. Try that one. Oh, I'll spin this one then. Yeah. I mean, what we could do as well is I might just rotate it manually. Also, you notice the pivot point is wrong anyway. So let's... Okay, so that's X. So we'll just do 90 degrees on X. Okay. So there's our rotating sidearm. And then we'll just do the same thing roughly for box 3. So again, that needs to be centered, rotation, and I'm assuming it's X. There we go. What we could do, just to make things interesting, is we'll make this minus 90. Okay, so it's kind of doing that. Okay, just a little animation, right? So again, fairly straightforward. Once you've animated it, you're going to go to File, Save Model. It's that simple. And now if we go back to RPG in a Box and import our model, I'm going to put it back to not double-sided because none of the faces are hollow. So that's fine. I can leave it as is. Here's our model. Let's rotate it so that the blue is facing the front. It's come in with a default animation. It's detected that it has an animation and it's called default. If we press play, it's playing our animation. It should loop. Okay, so that's playing fine. And if we add it to the map, because it's named default, it should start playing that as soon as we load the map. So let's just delete that, put this back in, go into game. Okay, and there we go. I didn't need to tell it to animate because it's named default. It's doing it of its own accord. Okay. Now, again, remember that the limitation at the moment with the native importer is the collision doesn't update. So frame one collision will be what matters. So it doesn't matter for the main body, but these arms, for example, as they're rotating, the collision is staying at frame one. That will hopefully change over time because we have that ability with voxel models to have it update on per frame basis, but BlockBench models don't currently have that yet. So now to talk about some important things to know about animating your BlockBench models when it comes to the native importer. So I'm going to create a scenario where the animations don't play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my animation and I'm going to select the last frame of each box that rotates. And I'm going to set this to minus 360, or maybe even let's try 270. Let's just see what happens. And we'll put 270 on here. So this is a huge rotation, right? So this time it's going around a lot faster, okay? Because it's doing a lot more rotating, okay? And we will export or save modern. And we'll re-import it. It imports fine. We'll rotate it to face the right way. We have our animation. And it does actually play, which I kind of was expecting, but I just wanted to test. So I'm not hugely surprised that that's working, but I am now going to show you something that doesn't work. So let's go back to BlockBench and we're going to change this to 360. So a complete rotation minus 360. Okay, so these should do a complete spin in opposite directions. Okay, so back to blue, basically. Start to blue, back to blue. Save model, import, spin it round, oops, and play. And you'll notice it's not. Okay, so there's a limitation at the moment, and it does talk about this in the documentation. It says rotations greater than 180, which is why I wanted to test the 270 just to see if it did work. It did work. I knew that 360 wouldn't because it's part of something I found out recently that 360 is definitely is too big a rotation. But it says here that rotations greater than 180 in animations can result in unexpected behavior. And it does say that this can be corrected by inserting additional keyframes to prevent a change of more than 180 degrees. So for example, if we wanted to do 360, we could put a frame in between. So let's say 1.5. Let's put a keyframe here and here. That's doing 180. Okay. Let's see if that helps. rotate this around. Yeah. So that's how you get your 360 back. You just have to have you just have to have a keyframe in between that means you go halfway first and then you go to 360. So you just have to break the animation up a bit, right? You just can't do a complete spin from 0 to 360 as your 2 keyframes, right? You have to break it up. So just be mindful of that. These are all issues that you don't have to worry about if you use Mail.wi's converter, but if you want to use the native importer, these are just the current limitations. These will be improved, I'm sure, but just right now, you need to break these things up a bit. Now, the other thing that is a limitation to animations in the native importer is multi-axis rotations. So what I'm going to do to set this up is I'm just going to delete these and animate it slightly different. So what I'm going to do is the middle box is going to rotate and rotate in multiple axes. So if we put a point at the beginning, and again, we know we can't rotate it more than 360 unless we put a point in the middle, but just to keep things simple, I'm just going to spin it 180, but in all directions, right? Oh, and we need to centralize the pivot point. So 180, 180, 180. Okay, so now we've got this cube that's kind of is doing like a multi-axis rotation. No. Simple, but a little too complicated for the native importer, because the moment you try that, again, it's not rotating. Now, it's important to point out that in this case, that would be the only thing that doesn't rotate. So if I was to go back to BlockBench for a minute and add the other boxes in and give them some rotation, that does work. So if I was to make this 90, 90, okay, so this is our model now. The arms will still rotate, okay. So this is not completely stopping the model animating, but it just means that any meshes that rotate on multiple axes wait. Okay, so you notice the middle one is not doing its multi-rotational axis, but the arms, because they're only rotating one axis, they're still animating, right? Now, there is a workaround for this, and I'm going to show you that in a second, but it's just really important to point this out that at the moment, unless you do the workaround, again, this is something that the converter can just do. So if you just want to get your model in really quickly and simply, feel free to use the converter. But this is an example where it's good to know this stuff and report it to Justin so that he can improve the native importer, because this is something that should just work, right? Multiple axis rotation should probably be something that can, if possible, work by just importing it, by setting it on the mesh itself. Anyway, let me show you the workaround just in case you do encounter this and you want to import it natively. What you need to do is you can't do it via the mesh itself. So in this case, because I want the middle box to rotate in all 3 axes, I can't rotate the box. Okay, so we're going to remove these keyframes and we're going to remove this box entirely from the animation. And instead what we're going to do is we're going to set up some bones that are going to handle each axis. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create I have to do it from here, does I? I'm going to create a bone and we'll just call this box 3, I think it is, X. We'll create another one, which is box 3, Y. And we'll create one more, which is box 3, Z. Okay. And then what you want to do is put one inside the other. So this one goes inside box X and that one goes inside box Y. So they're all nested, okay? And then lastly, the box itself, and should be box 1, isn't it? Okay, we'll leave it named that, but in this case, we're going to put box 1 into box 3X. Into box 3Z, the bottom one. So if I can get this to work, on. I want to go across. There we go. Yep. So it's at the very bottom. So it goes box free X, box free Y, box free Z, and then your bone that contains the mesh. Okay. So what that means is when we get to animating, we can select the first one. And we know that when we go from the beginning to the end, we want to rotate on the X axis 90. Okay. And obviously that needs to be centered. Now, there is a slight issue here when you're using the. Let me just think about this for a second. Yeah, so pivot point 14. Is that right? Yeah. So what we need to do is. Okay, that is that working now? No. Yeah, so we need to put 14 in here. That's what I was trying to do. Okay, it needs to match the pivot point on your bones needs to match where the box is, right? So in this case, I needed that number 14, and you're going to use that number for the other pivots as well. So we've got this now rotating on its axis, okay, but it's only one axis, 90. There's X going 90, right? So then we select Y, and we add that in, and we add a rotation point there and a rotation point there. Again, you need to make sure that this is set to 14, so it's rotating on the spot rather than rotating in space. This is the y-axis that needs to rotate 90. So now it should be rotating in two directions, right? Because essentially one bone is rotating one way at the same time as the other bone's rotating the other, but because they're all attached, because this mesh here is attached to all three, it's being rotated in all three directions. So then the last one to do is Z. So I'll add a point there. Oops. I'll add a point there. And this is Z90. And again, that needs to be 14. So it's rotating on the spot. So now we have a cube that is now essentially rotating the same way as it would have been if we just told the mesh to rotate X, Y, and Z, 90, 90, 90. But now it's doing it each bone is individually rotating on one axis. And because each bone is only handling one axis, that means it does the same rotation, but more importantly, the native importer will actually work with it. Okay, so now we have an animation that actually works, rotating on all three axes. Okay, and then again, because it's called default, we can stop this, go to the map, place it down, go into game, and there it is in our Mac playing its animation. So that pretty much brings us to the end of the video. It's a really simple video, this one. I just wanted to help people who want to just get started with BlockBench and importing it into RPG in a Box, get those sort of initial headaches out of the way that people are going to encounter with animations, but also just how do you import models into RPG in a Box? What are the things you need to be mindful of? What does the double-sided faces option mean? What's it for? That kind of thing. So, and really hopefully encourage people to actually try out the native importer. It's not perfect. There will be instances where models might not import properly or animations don't play properly. We're all learning how to use this native importer. It's improving over time as I mess around with it, and as its quirks get found out. And the converter is out there if you need a fail-safe way of importing your models. But the nice thing about RPG in a Box's native importer is it's improving that native support, because at the end of the day, if RPG in a Box claims it can import BlockBench models, then its ability to import those BlockBench models should be pretty robust. So the more we can report issues by using it and encountering those issues and getting them fixed, the better RPG in a Box's BlockBench support can become. But as you can hopefully see and appreciate in this video, it's a lot better than it was. Models are importing, animations are playing. I've yet to encounter a model personally that I've made that I haven't been able to import. And as I said at the beginning of this video, back when I first started messing around with the first version of BlockBench support, I couldn't even import a cube, you know? So it was clearly not fully implemented because I couldn't even import a cube. Now, that's not to say other people couldn't import models, because people were, but I just didn't understand how they were able to because I couldn't even import a cube. So it's come a long way, So, the days of needing the converter just to import a model, I think we're past that now. But if you do want to use the converter because you want the advanced features, or if you're encountering any issues that currently can't be fixed until it's patched, then, absolutely feel free to use it. But here's the video nonetheless on how to import via the RPG in a Box importer. If you have any questions or issues that you're encountering with importing, then obviously feel free to ask on the Discord. I'll take a look at those models. And if there's a solution within BlockBench, I'll happily, let you know what the solution is. And if it's something that Justin just needs to fix, like for example, this, even though it's a workaround, if it's possible for Justin to be able to make it so that the mesh itself can just rotate on multiple axes, I think that should be, possible. And I think that should be built into the base importer, to be honest. So things like that just need to be reported back to Justin so that he can improve these things. Anyway, that'll wrap up this video. Hope it was useful. Stay tuned for the next tutorial.